I want to start off by introducing our three panelists. The first of which is Dr. Joanne Degiorgio Lutz. She's a professor of political science and department head of liberal studies at Texas A&M University at Galveston. She edited 2 books on women in higher education and is a co-editor of Women in Genocide, Gendered Experiences of Violence, Survival, and Resistance. She is the recipient of 2 J. William Fulbright Awards. One is a core scholar to the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan in 2008, and the other as a Fulbright Specialist to Cambodia in 2010. She was also a fellow in the Jack and Anita Hess Faculty Seminar on the Holocaust and Other Genocides with the United States Holocaust Museum and Memorial. Her research focuses on gender and memorialization as a vehicle for transitional justice in the aftermath of mass atrocities. She also serves as book review editor for the flagship journal in Genocide Studies and Prevention, an international journal. Our second panelist today is Mr. Mohammed Kizwar Hossein, who is a senior lecturer in law at East West University, Dhaka, Bangladesh. He is also an advocate at the District and Session Judge Court in Dhaka. He has received a couple of academic awards, including the Vice Chancellor's Gold Medal and the Chancellor's Gold Medal in his Bachelor of Laws and Master of Laws programs, respectively. His research interests cover public international law, human rights, criminology, and criminal justice, constitutional law, public policy, and international commercial arbitration. His papers are published in many refereed journals, and he presented some research papers in both national and international seminars and conferences. He serves as a research volunteer at both the Center for the Study of Genocide and Justice, Liberation War Museum, Bangladesh, and the Asia Justice and Rights of Indonesia. He also serves as advisor of the NILS Bangladesh Law Review. Our third panelist is Dr. Martha Galvan Mandujano, is an assistant professor of Spanish in the Department of World Languages and Cultures at California Polytechnic State University in San Luis Obispo. She received her PhD in Spanish and a certification in Women and Gender Studies from the University of Oklahoma. She usually teaches Spanish journalism, medical Spanish, significant works of Spanish and Mexican cultures. Her research focuses on public memorialization in coordination with civil society organizations in Guatemala and the role of social media in the memorialization process. Dr. Galvan Mandujano also researches Latin American literature, focusing on writers such as Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, Cristina Pera-Rossi, and Mayra Montero. Some of her publications are Genocide in Central America, Testimonies of Survivors in Guatemala, Remembranza de Género, Memoria Colectiva y Formas de Memorialización después del Genocidio de Guatemala, co-author of Gendered Remembrance, Collective Memory, Memorialization and Forgiveness, Cambodia and Guatemala. Romero, Archbishop, Oscar, Murder of, 1980, Encyclopedia of U.S. Military Interventions in Latin America, co-author of Mujeres de Acción, La Figura Femenina en Adios Muchachos. Thank you to our hosts for this conference, and we'll begin with Dr. Degiorgio Lutz. Dr. Degiorgio?
Thank you. I was muted. So thank you to the conference organizers and my colleagues and participants in this last of the panel of this great conference. This is a collaborative work that we are, and a comparative study that Kizwar and Martha and I are working on. And this is just sort of a preliminary look at some of the work that we're looking at in both Guatemala and Bangladesh. And so the idea for our research actually grew out of this idea of what we started to see were growing human rights abuses, especially in these post-genocide societies, and even more so among the growing patterns of hate worldwide in the past couple of years. And so what we know is that after every genocide, after every mass atrocity, we hear the refrain, never again. And so again, after every genocide, we start to erect monuments, memorials, and in particular museums that tend to honor and remember the victims and to try to educate about these crimes in that spirit of never again. And so these public memorials become part and parcel of the new initiatives that are designed to create and commemorate and to learn from mass atrocities and human rights abuses. Louis Bickford, in his work, calls these memorialization efforts memory works. And the aim is really for redress and prevention. And so memory works, and in particular, memory museums with an educative function, are meant to fill the spaces that prosecution really cannot reach, even though they do aid in the transitional justice initiatives and efforts. So even with all of this memorialization and even these educative efforts, we know that genocide and mass atrocity crimes are still prevalent. And so this led us to then question the efficacy of museums that are designed to educate about genocide and crimes against humanity. And so we know that the universality of never again as a tool for the prevention of genocide was born out of the Holocaust and the need to educate about this event. This often repeated phrase, sounded at the end of every genocide since the Holocaust, aims to serve as a preventive and educated tool against future genocide and mass atrocity crimes. And so former President Barack Obama unfailingly used the phrase repeatedly in his yearly statements to commemorate and mark International Holocaust Remembrance Day, quote, in part to ensure that never again was not just a phrase of remembrance, but also a principled cause, unquote. In 2013, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum chose Never Again for its Days of Remembrance theme, calling for a study of the Holocaust to serve as a warning of genocides, to achieve an educative function, and to promote an ethic of never again as a means of confronting genocide. Amy Sedero, in her work, explains that memorial museums facilitate the understanding of a violent past, and they work to, quote, morally educate, unquote, visitors, and to provide what she calls an opposite set of values that visitors should, and normatively, we would hope, employ in their day-to-day lives. So both of the museums that we're going to just focus on in this particular presentation have or advance an educative role about the violence that affected their respective societies. And so some of the work that we're going to be doing as we move forward with my colleagues is going to cast a little wider net. You know, we're reaching out, we're doing other museums in Guatemala, and we're also casting a net in Bosnia and so on. So for us, genocide museums can form part of the transitional justice toolkit that can facilitate post-conflict reconciliation, promote an educative agenda of never again, and really to see museums function as agents of change. Now, how are we framing our study? So we're framing our study in the context of more symbolic transitional justice. And we also, in terms of categorizing memory words, we're really interested in the takeaway. That is, what do visitors who leave, what's imparted on these visitors? What do they leave? And we call these expressions or the comments, the reflections that they express in guest books, visitor logs, any other form of museum engagement that allows for individual expression of the museum experience. We call these memory words. So like I said, we're really interested in that takeaway of what visitors walk away with from that initial museum experience. And so we're just kind of, like I said, laying this groundwork for this larger study. So we developed this sort of broad typology of these words and these memory words, and we measure them against the key objectives of each museum's mission statement. And we then try to subdivide them into categories that maybe revolve around memory words as a category of recovery of historical memory, the memorialization or dignification of victims. So what are people leaving behind? The necessity to never forget, and even to report on the function of the functional space of the museum itself as an edifice to disseminate this type of information. And so we would expect that the comments in any one category will provide a range of values like never again, messages of cultural importance, and so on. And so we also look to see whether these memory words capture these kinds of sub-questions that we're seeking to answer, especially as they relate to transitional justice. For example, what meaning and significance do memory words give to concepts such as reconciliation, remembrance, historical and collective memory, and so on? And then also, are they leaving behind a more universal message of never again? Do we see any reflections of other particular mass atrocities or genocides that are ongoing? Or are they leaving behind particular messages to that particular case, whether it's Guatemala or Bangladesh? And so we look at, we're categorizing our museums in terms of the functions of a public educative type function. Martha and I are doing some other memorialization work that looks at private reflective sort of work, but this is the context of more public, it's more educated. And also, where's the museum located? Is it located on an authentic site that is the site of a massacre, or is it a symbolic site, or is it merely a site of convenience? Hey, we were able to rent this particular building or had this particular house donated to us. And then also the scope. Is the context of the museum put in a more specific context, or is it a broader, more meta-narrative? In Guatemala, as Martha will talk, we see the meta-narrative of Guatemalan history and so on. And within that context, we locate the genocide. And so we also want to put this at the individual level of analysis, because we're really talking about the individual as the agent of change, because it's you who leave that museum experience that advocates for a never again. Now, right now, we understand that there are studies not without its limitations. For instance, one limitation centers on reliability and our inability to measure the longevity of sentiment. So, for example, how long after one exits the Memorial Museum does the experience remain? Is the longevity of the experience necessary to promote never again in response to any sort of face of encountering mass atrocity or genocide? So does one fall back on, hey, I'm hearing about this atrocity here, and I remember my visit to such and such a museum. So we don't have a way of measuring that. Or is the experience of having visited the Memorial Museum itself a sufficient reminder to elicit a never again response? So in looking at or collecting and documenting the memory words of specific museums, unless somebody actually leaves their place of residence or other details. In many cases, we don't know if the sentiments were left by a local resident or by Guatemalans, for us in particular Guatemala, from another department, or foreign nationals or tourists. So sometimes it's a little hard to gauge unless we get that information that's left behind. And we also have to be aware too that of our translations and interpretation of comments, especially some of them have to be put in a cultural context if they're written in another language. So these are some of the limitations of the study that we're addressing up front. And then really, why museums? I mean, museums are really, they've really changed, their roles have evolved over time. And so they're really more educational epicenters. And museums now are doing more in the way of engaging visitors to the museum. It's not just this passive sort of experience. And then we know that museums are not neutral. So how and what they choose to display is definitely not neutral. And they're becoming these epicenters of social activism. And so, some of the questions that those engaged in museum studies ask is, should they be seen as a place, for dialogue and social change? Is that their responsibility to do so? But we do know that museums now, part and parcel, are becoming sites for this type of social action. So with that, I'm going to turn it over actually to Kizwar, who's going to give some historical background on Bangladesh.
Thank you, Joanne, for giving me the floor. So I'll be talking about the historical background of Bangladesh. We have a long history, but I'll be briefly discussing the history. I'll be discussing the points of the 1947 British India partition, and then some discriminatory policies with an example, and then 1970s election, and finally the 1971 First War. So before I talk about the history of Bangladesh, I'd like to inform you first that in Bangladesh, the genocide began on 25th March 1974, which caused death of an estimated 3 million Bangladeshi people, rape of approximately 0.2 to 0.4 million Bengali women, displacement of 10 million people, and destruction of belongings of the general. Now, let me give you an idea about the origin of the struggle of the people, and then I'll briefly talk about the next which caused the irreparable loss that I just shared with you. The British left the Indian subcontinent in August 1947, but before that, they partitioned the British India into two different states. One is India and another one is Pakistan. The basis of this division was the two-nation treaty, which denotes that Hindus and Muslims were two distinct communities, and therefore they could not coexist within a single state. The British also highlighted the fact that there would be domination, discrimination, and even conflicts among themselves if they stay in one single country. So, as a result of the partition, Pakistan emerged as an independent state. And the newly created Pakistan was comprised of two parts, East and West. And a majority of its population was, of course, Muslims. East Pakistan is today's independent country, Bangladesh, and West Pakistan is now Pakistan. So after 1947, the government of Pakistan started implementing numerous discriminatory policies backed by its administration and armed forces. The main purpose was to exercise control over the economy and ruling powers of the East Pakistan, which is now Bangladesh. I can give several examples of such discriminatory policies, but let me give one example given time limitation. In 1952, the Pakistani government announced that Urdu language, which is used by mostly the West Pakistani people, will be the only state language, whereas the people of East Pakistan used to speak in Bangla. So the Bengali students and the political activists of the East Pakistan protested against this decision, and at the end, they had to sacrifice their lives for compelling the government of Pakistan to grant official status to Bangladesh. So this sort of discrimination and revolutionary movements between the East Pakistani and the West Pakistani people were going on after 1947's partition. Now, to make the long history short, let me talk about the 1971's Liberation War. In 1970, an election was held in Pakistan. In that election, East Pakistan's dominant political party was Awami League. This party became the single majority party in the National Assembly by winning 167 seats out of 313 seats. However, the West Pakistani authorities did not transfer the power to Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, who was the leader of the Awami League party of that time. Instead, after a few months, on the night of 25th March 1971, the Pakistani military launched an operation, which is popularly known as Operation Searchlight, to execute the policemen, the soldiers, and military officers based in East Pakistan. They also intended to capture and kill the professionals, intellectuals, and students of East Pakistan. Therefore, under the leadership of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, the East Pakistanis protested and declared Bangladesh as an independent country on 26 March 1971. And that consequently spiked a full-scale war between East and West Pakistan. Finally, after 9 months Liberation War, the Bangladeshi people achieved their victory on 16 December 1971. So our day of independence is 26 March 1971. It's approaching in this month. This is our month of independence. Thank you, everyone. Now I'd like to request Martha to talk about working class history.
Thank you, Kishwar. And I will talk a little bit of I'm confident then I will go to the Commission for Historical Clarification. In between 1960 and 1996, Guatemala experienced a protracted armed internal conflict in the context of the 36-year war in a period known as La Violencia. The government forces waged genocide against the indigenous Maya to thwart their alleged support for the guerrillas. At the conclusion of the conflict and as part of the peace process, the 1996 Oslo Accord for Firm and Lasting Peace established the Commission for Historical Clarification, in Spanish is Comisión para el Esclarecimiento Histórico. Functioning as a true commission, the same mandate was to explain why both the government and the guerrillas committed extreme acts of genocide, and it was over 200,000 people displaced to up to a million, and that led to the destruction of more than 600 Mayan villages. And the number of disappear is between, some people, some books will cite 40,000, some people say 45,000. And the authors of the said report believe that documenting these atrocities and uncovering the truth of what transpired will foster national reconciliation and promote human rights for everyone. When the commission submitted its report to the Guatemalan people, the government of Guatemala, and the United Nations in February 1999, it represented the perspective and experiences of the victims. The lead commissioner for the SEC, Christian Tunushat, views that this is extreme because it restores the dignity of the victims and ensure their suffering will not be lost in the anonymous stream of history. The SEC report also noted the importance of the recovery of the historical memory, both individually and collectively, has means of preserving the memory of the victims in accordance with the Oslo Accord. The SEC recommended several measures to achieve the goal of preserving the memory of the victims. This included dignity of the victims, and the victim remembrance defined as a designated day for the commemoration of the victims. February 25th was the day that was set. The building of monuments in public parks supported by all levels of government, and naming public spaces after victims. However, despite of the said recommendations, memorialization, which includes the construction of memorial museums and the search of symbolic transitional justice, remains as a grassroots endeavor. This is driven by the fact that the state denies the genocide took place, which left leaving the creation of memorials and memory museums to survivors and indigenous associations, which included the establishment of the memorial museums. And now I will go to the, Joanne, can you go to the next one? To the one that I focus in this presentation is the Casa de la Memoria, Cajitu Lam, para no olvidar, which means like to not forget. And this was opened, they opened the doors in 2014 as a public educative space. This memorial museum functions as a mechanism for recording the past in a space in which the truth about what transpired and on display for the museum's visitors. This functions evident throughout the museum's 10 exhibition rooms that present the meta-narrative of the Maya from the creation, the conquest, the internal armed conflict, and the commitment genocide, followed by the exhibits they provide throughout the racism, peace, and healing. Created and designed by CalDH, what is the Center for Human Rights Legal Action, Casa de la Memoria operates as a community museum for survivors, their families, and other residents, as well as international visitors. It is also a member of the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience. They recognize museums, memorials, and historic sites as a place of memory, working to ensure traumatic memories are remembered and not eradicated. As a memorial museum, his focus is both educational and commemorative, and the museum's atrium serves as a venue for various creative and collaborative approaches to memory, including educational workshops, commemorative rituals, music, fundraising and performing, and visual art workshops that approach the museum's narrative of the human rights violations in Guatemala. It serves to remember and to reconstruct the collective identity of the Maya so they don't forget their history, especially the recent violence past and the persistence of racism. The Memorial Museum provides reflective space that commemorates the many victims of the internal armed conflict whose names are embroidered on individualized quilts that drape the entire reflection room, and many containing the details of their deaths. And this, you can see this room, they only have these quilts, but they tell us that they have so many but they only put like one of those to see the number of disappear, or if they disappear or they died. So what happened to them? The Casa de la Memoria also served as a commemorative site where groups gather on February 25th to perform Mayan ceremonies. They commemorate the National Day of Dignity of the victim of Guatemala's armed conflict. The educative objective of the museum is primarily directed at the Guatemala youth who don't have direct experience with the country's recent violent past. It directs its memory message throughout the exhibits that reconstruct Guatemala's historical memory and the hope that its youth will work to transform society and take action against racism and patriarchy and the characterized society. The exhibition rooms, can you go to the, oh, what was it? The exhibition rooms are arranged chronologically and visitors progress throughout the timeline of critical events narrating the country's history. Casa de la Memoria provides their visitors with multiple methods of engagement, the visitor book, and a room dedicated to encourage visitor graffiti. Their visitor book is not permanently placed in the museum. Instead, it resides on the shelf behind the museum personnel desk near to the entrance exit. Well, it seems like it's the same entrance and then you exit in the same place. Visitors are not necessarily encouraged to write in the guest book. However, there are several hundred entries over the span of 5 years. It's a large member of the traffic at this small museum. Their graffiti room is located towards the end of their tour in the back of the museum. Immediately following a gallery with strong, harsh, stimulating content that preemptively simulates visitors to passionately contribute to reflection of the content. Visitors are encouraged to contribute by writing on any available surface, such as the walls, the ceiling, and doors. These two mediums allow for different types of visitor commentary, and it shapes the viewer's encounter with the museum experience. By having a room dedicated to visitors' graffiti, it presents contributors with previous visitors' comments, which can influence what they contribute. Additionally, the graffiti room's walls are periodically refreshed with a fresh coat of white paint to create a blank shelf for others. Both exhibits and the visitor are active participants in sharing the events as they influence one another. An element in the exhibit may spark a memory, and through engagement methods, visitors can contribute, say, memory. This has an impact on interpretation because it's no longer unbiased or neutral, but instead through the lens of public in that moment. This now drives museums to be facilitators of change. When visitors actively participate in museums through varying engagement methods, such as comments in the visitor book, they leave parts of their experience behind. They share histories and their voice with other patrons, the museum, and the collection. This facilitates social experiences and personalization. The memory works left by visitors in the graffiti room that we documented in November 2019 reflected the following themes: references to meta-narrative of the Maya, congratulations on the aesthetics of the museum space, the importance of history and memory, and reference to never again, never forget. In particular, comments specifically express the familiar refrain of the defiance of the state narrative, si hubo genocidio, there was a genocide, with no attribution to the author. And here you can see words like beautiful, es muy bonito, that's the Spanish word, muy bonito trabajo, but in the midst of aesthetics bonito, but also like you're doing a good job, and like no olvidemos, and they talk about also like collectively, like when you go through this, the memory words, you can see many of the students happy because it's the audience is mainly youth, and you can see that they feel like also like juntos, we can do it, like together we can in peace, and we can like, let's remember. And many of all the other sentences will be also like, I had never learned anything about this, like it's good that you have this beautiful space. So they say again, bonito lugar, so like a beautiful place. Additional memory words left in the space were primarily autobiographical, names of cities and residents. Absent from this space was the acknowledgement of the ongoing transitional justice issues, especially in ongoing Creon Pass case, whereby former military officers were charged with forced disappearance and crimes against humanity, and the former detention and clandestine execution center of the area known as Military Zone 21 during the internal armed conflict. Exhumations uncovered 558 human remains. Among these remains, over 90 children, and 4 graves, which remain the largest mass graves uncovered today in Guatemala. The other method of in-person visitor engagement is the visitor book. In contrast to the graffiti wall, this periodically refreshed, washing away previous memory words, the visitor book has permanency. The first entry corresponds to the opening of the museum in February 2014. At that time, our visit in March 2019, the last entry we recorded was in February 2019. The majority of the memory works are led by local school groups thanking the museum for their accurate representation of the country's turbulent history. Memory works expressed by school groups noted that their curriculum doesn't educate on the genocide, nor they are schooled on the struggle of the Maya and their victimization during the period of the Scorched Earth campaign. And this Scorched Earth campaign happened in between 1981 and 1983 when Rios Montt was in charge. He was the one that created most of this turbulence in this time in order of the scorched area of this in the Quiche area in the northern part of Guatemala, because they, like I mentioned before, they thought they were part of the guerrilla, or they were helping the guerrilla. Memory words, there are also corresponding memory words with many comments grateful for the moral education the museum experience in parts of its visitors and the necessity to teach the truth of what transpired. Only a few memory words specifically articulate never again. Additionally, many of the memory words complement the museum of its historical representation of the cities fulfilling the museum and function the Sodero discusses, like my colleague mentioned before. Indirect references to transitional justice are made primarily by international visitors of the museum. And you will see these international visitors are usually universities that go to the Guatemala, or groups like from Peru or Colombia. They have like also working in justice and things like that. Among these include the Father Roy Bourgeois, founder of the School of the Americas Watch, who expressed, open quotes, hope for the struggle, close quotes, and a member of the Veterans for Peace, noting in the crimes against humanity committed against the people of Guatemala. So this is, I'm just gave you like a small overview of what we have found in this study. And I will turn now to my colleague, Kizwar.
Right. Thank you, Mithun. So before I talk about the comment books of the Degiorgio Museum, let me tell you how the comments are collected from the visitors. Because it's not only the Degiorgio Museum, physical visit. Rather, the Degiorgio Museum has some other programs outside of the Degiorgio Museum. So the Degiorgio Museum was inaugurated on 22nd March 1996. So we have got the comments from 1996 from the time of its inauguration. There were 8 trustee members who established this museum, dedicating it to the freedom fighters and people who have sacrificed their lives and suffered for making Bangladesh as an independent nation. They have collected, all the trustees and the members of the Degiorgio Museum, the staff, they have collected a lot of objects, exhibitions of events, documents that relate to the struggle of the people of the Degiorgio Museum. Now, let me categorically explain the major programs of the Degiorgio Museum through which the comments are collected or we have received the comments. First of all, the outreach program is one of the major initiatives of the Degiorgio Museum that brings the students of different Dhaka city-based educational institutions together. Dhaka is the capital of Bangladesh, so it's the central city where most of the educational institutions are situated. So this outreach program is to, make all the students of Dhaka city-based students together. The purpose is to teach them about the history of the Bangladesh genocide using the museum as a learning tool. Secondly, the Degiorgio Museum has a mobile museum to reach the students who reside outside Dhaka city. Under this program, the mobile museum and its team travel to a particular district in Bangladesh. We have total 64 districts, and generally they spend a month here. Since the target populations of this program are students, from the post-primary to university levels. The mobile museum team visits the educational institutions of towns, rural areas, and even marginalized communities. They arrange multimodal programs such as the exhibition of historically significant documents, photographs, and objects in a bus, which can move from one place to another, and showing a film on struggle of the Bengali people. Last but not least, the Liberation Museum received more than 25,000 objects till December 2020 from the freedom fighters, family members of the martyrs, worldwide activists, scholars, and researchers. A few of the collected photographs, documents, and other objects are exhibited in a total of 4 distinct galleries of the present Liberation Museum. The exhibitions make the visitors perceive the sacrifice of the Bengali people for their liberation. So after completing the entire journey or visit throughout all the 4 galleries of the Liberation Museum, the visitors have an opportunity to write comments on the comment book, which is situated at the place from where the visitors used to exit from the museum. And the visitors have an opportunity to leave a comment that I already just said about their reactions ending their journey through the galleries. Most of the visitors record their name, institution below their comments. The visitors have the liberty to write their thoughts, outlooks based on their museum experience, as there is no set of questions to respond. So they have the liberty to write whatever they want regarding the reflection of the visit. The visitors reveal what the Liberation Museum means to them personally and what is the effectiveness of the museum exhibitions. They often connect their existing knowledge with the exhibitions and objects presented at the galleries. So the Liberation Museum reserves all the comment books and reproduces selected comments of the visitors in each year's newsletter published on the occasion of its founding anniversary. Now, so this is the form that you can see in this slide. The only comment book is available in the Liberation Museum, where the visitors can write their comment. So, can you please move forward to the next slide? Joanne, please advance the slide. Thank you. So here we have actually found some themes based on the comments of the visitors of the Liberation Museum. So while exploring the contents of the visitors' statements, many themes have been identified throughout the comment books of 25 years from 1986 to 2020. The examination of the books yielded mostly positive results. However, a very small proportion of the visitors made some critical remarks concerning practical issues such as the prohibition on taking photographs in the galleries. Besides, some of the visitors requested for written material in additional languages. So we have only 2 languages, Bangla and English, which are written below the objects of the Liberation Museum. But there are some visitors who are not that good at English, and since they are not from Bangladesh, so they have limitations about that. So they've requested in the comments that there should be some other languages in addition to Bangla and English language written under the objects of the Liberation Museum. And then some of them have said that more materials need to include to show the brutality of rape incidents of 1971 Liberation War. Now let me discuss the themes that we have found based on the study of the visitor comments regarding their document one by one. So you can see the first one is congratulatory. Most of the visitors have congratulated the Liberation Museum to take such an initiative to collect the objects, the photographs that relate with the history of the 1971 Liberation War. For example, one of the visitors in 1987, one of the visitors has written that at the time when a group of people are trying to erase the real history of independence from the minds of a new generation, the Liberation Museum is attempting to revive it through a photo exhibition, and it is truly a great initiative. So this comment is about 1997 when Bangladesh was undergoing some political turmoils. So there was a tendency among that times, political party or even the people, we were having the experience that our history was getting erased. So therefore, this visitor has related his experience regarding, these political issues to with the Liberation Museum's initiative. So they have congratulated the Liberation Museum for taking such an initiative. Second thing that we have found is realizing collections of the museum. Before discussing this theme, let me give another example. One of the visitors, she visited the Liberation Museum on the occasion of her birthday. So she said that today is my birthday. The best present was in the bloody part of my own country, Bangladesh. The whole building is an art. It displays tears of Bengalis, unspoken words of the sharp mouths, and the brutalities of Pakistan with the values of our nation. The videos, the descriptions, the writings have left a mark on my brain, skipped a beat in my heart, and left tears on my eyes. So she took the visit of the Liberation Museum as a gift on the occasion of her birthday. So, and she have, realized the collections of the museum. She have understood that how Liberation Museum is passing the history of liberation from one generation to another. Let's move on to the third theme, messages on the importance of their memory and collective history. So we have a history that I've just mentioned during describing the historical background of Bangladesh, that history started from 1947. So people were trying to relate the history with the exhibitions of the Liberation Museum. For example, one of the visitors, she said that even after the War of Liberation, some so-called Bengalis argue that only 30,000 people, not 3 million, have died during the war. The information regarding the history of our independence is distorted, but this museum inspires people to love and sacrifice for the country. So this statement is a very significant statement that we have found, because in Bangladesh, there are, some people who used to argue that it's not 3 million, rather only 30,000 people were killed during the 1970 Liberation War. So just against this comment, this visitor made her statement clear that after visiting the Liberation Museum, she have realized that the number cannot be 30,000 based on the gravity of the atrocity that the Bangladeshi people have gone through in 1974. So this is a kind of realization has been brought into the mind of a visitor that shows the importance of memory and collective history made by the Liberation Museum. A fourth one is reflections on the meta-narrative. So it's similar to the Guatemala's finding. We have the similar kind of reflection. For example, one of the visitors said that an excellent account of the history of the liberation movement. I was sad to know that the Bengali raped women were not accepted by their own people, but ostracized. They suffered twice. So this visitor, she is from United Kingdom. So she came to know about the history that after the Liberation War, the rape victims of Bangladesh were not welcomed in our society. They were rather ostracized. So she tried to relate that experience with the experience that she had after visiting the Liberation Museum. Next one is addressing loss of culture and identity. So this theme is about the apprehension that we are losing our culture and identity day by day. For example, one of the visitors say that it's really, really nice. It has a great demand for our dignity and freedom, so we have to preserve it. So it is a kind of urge to the authorities, to the people of Bangladesh, that we need to preserve our culture, our identity, and Liberation Museum is one of the institutions which is trying to do it, which is trying to preserve the historical objects of the Liberation War of 1971, so that the new generation can know about the Liberation War's history of Bangladesh. Next one, I have just two themes. Maybe I'm not running short of time. So the next one is demand for justice. This is one of the unique themes we have got in our study, because in Bangladesh there is a trend of impunity of the perpetrators. Because I'll share with you one of the examples of the comment that raised a demand for justice. He said that amnesty is not expected for all the times. Proper justice with evidence is honestly needed for the respect of the martyrs. So it's about amnesty. But in our country, after 1971, there were some attempts to bring the perpetrators who have committed different kinds of crimes, for example, genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, during the 1971 Liberation War. So there was an attempt to prosecute all those people, but those attempts were not successful until the International Crimes Tribunal of Bangladesh started prosecution of those perpetrators, some of those perpetrators from 2010. So before 2010, the people were worried about their justice because there was no attempt that was successful to bring the perpetrators into trial. So they were having the demand for justice that the perpetrators must be tried. And even right now, amnesty is a problem in our country. It's a challenge, it's a legal challenge. I would say it's a so-called amnesty because this amnesty is being used by the Pakistani army officials to render the message that they have got amnesty, so their trial is not required. But there is still a demand among the people of Bangladesh, which have been reflected in the comments, that the 195 Pakistani army officials must be brought into trial, and they should not enjoy the amnesty because it's not expected for all the times. So this kind of demands were made by the visitors, and we have found it in the comments. So it's one of the unique themes we have found, I would say again. And the final one is educative functions of the museum. For example, promoting idea of never again and never forget. So it's also similar to the Guatemala's museum. One of the examples is that a visitor from Cambodia, he said that it's sad to see many lives lost. I have no nation, I hope no nation witnessed such horrific experience ever. So it reflects that the visitors have an idea, they perceive that this sort of experiences should not be experienced by any country's people because it's really horrific. So they have, tried to promote the idea of never again, genocide never again, and at the same time we should not forget our history. So before I just finish my presentation, let me give just last example. It's one of the comments, and it's a really contemporary comment, I would say. One of the visitors from Bangladesh, they say that not the country people have to change, and that's how each country will change. At this moment, we should stand against Myanmar for stopping genocide against Rohingya people. So it is claimed that Myanmar has committed genocide against the Rohingya people. The case is also pending in the ICJ, the case brought by the Gambia. So this comment is related to that reflection that since we have faced genocide in 1971 in our country, we should also stand against such kind of events. For example, our neighboring country, Myanmar, is committing allegedly genocide against Rohingya people. So we should stand against them. We should, prevail this campaign that never again. So we should stand against Myanmar so that they cannot continue committing genocide against Rohingya people. So these are the reflections we have got so far from our study through the comments of the visitors of the Degiorgio. Thank you, Joanne. Now it's your turn.
I'm going to go ahead and stop share since we only have like a few minutes left, 10 minutes left, and we'll open it up for questions, I suppose.
Yes, we have 2 questions so far have been submitted via chat, and I'll read them and address them to the panel in order as they come in. Dr. Mandujano, one question from John Weiss about the dedicated room to visitors. Do they actually argue and engage with each other? In the visitors book at the Memorial de la Paix in Cayenne, there are extensive arguments. So he's asking if the visitors are actually allowed to engage with each other in Guatemala.
The wall is there, like they give you the paints and you can put any comment that you want, but I haven't noticed. I noticed that they may have just like you say like they put like me gustó el museo, that I like the museum, and some people put the same thing, like a lot of the solidarity, but I haven't seen like arguments between each other. I don't know if you just have seen that, Joanne, in your visit.
I've only noticed that one. That's an interesting observation. I've only noticed that one time in the visitor engagement book where somebody made a comment that was, it wasn't exactly, there wasn't a genocide, but it was a real derogatory comment about the function and space of the museum. But that was the only time, and they left, it was anonymous. I don't know who made it, but I only noticed that once in the visitor book.
Okay. We have another question also from John Weiss, and I believe this is directed towards Professor Hossein. Are you comparing the specifics of the sense of loss of Bangladeshi culture with comments on the loss of Mayan culture?
All right, so we are still working on, the comparison part. So yes, we'll look into some of the cultures of Bangladesh, including the Mayan culture, and we will try to compare the sense of loss of culture, which we have got from the themes of the, comments of the visitors of the museum. So yes, we will try to connect, because this culture is also related to the people of Bangladesh, the culture of the people of Bangladesh. Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let me add something to that. Another piece that Martha and I are working on looks at the museum in Robinal, which is the community museum up in the Department of Baja Verapaz. And that museum, that memorial museum, is dedicated exclusively to the Maya Achi. And everything there, you can see all the comments, the reflections, everything is really focused just on the loss to that particular Mayan group and their culture. There's no mention of a larger context or other groups. So it's really kind of interesting. And then at the same time, you don't see any reference to specific groups in Guatemala City. So each museum has its own takeaway, the way those exhibits and things are presented. So it's really kind of interesting.
Okay. I'm not seeing any other questions or comments really in the chat. And so I'd like to take the opportunity, I guess, to wrap everything up. Thank you to the Liberation War Museum for hosting this conference in association and collaboration with Texas A&M University at Galveston. All right. And so once again, thank you to Dr. Joanne Degiorgio Lutz for your presentation, Professor Mohammed Kizwar Hossein, and Dr. Martha Galvin Mandujano. And thank you to all the attendees as well.